Hello, and welcome to We Live for Saturday, your favorite college football podcast. I'm normally your co host, Mike, but tonight I am just your host, Mike. I am live streaming. This is our first ever live stream, but I felt like I had to do it right now. So I am going to just put this on the internet quick and let people know that I'm live streaming to get this going. All right. Okay, sorry, I'm just putting this stuff on here. Oh, whoops. All right. Awesome. All right. So I am right here. Um, I am right here excited to talk about Minnesota's 24-6 victory over the Nebraska Cornhuskers. So let's talk about what I was wrong about first. I was wrong because I picked Nebraska to win this game. I picked Nebraska to win 27-24. And I thought that there was a chance Minnesota could win. But if the Gophers were going to win tonight, they needed to play their best ball. They needed to show up and play the most complete game they had played all season because Nebraska's playing well. Nebraska's coming in off a big win. They're looking good. Their only loss was to Michigan, and that was a narrow loss at that. So Nebraska was hitting on all cylinders coming into this game. They were Dylan Raiola's completing, mid 70s passes. Emmett Johnson ran all over Maryland last week. And Matt Rule tried to make the Emmett Johnson thing like a big thing. And he had Nebraska do a walkthrough at his high school because Emmett Johnson grew up a Gopher fan and wanted Minnesota to recruit him, and the Gophers did not because they had other running backs in the class ahead of them. But it's was a non-issue because Nebraska didn't really recruit him anyway either until the very end. So they took him when like someone else dropped out of their recruiting class. So Emmett Johnson got absolutely shut down tonight. And Nebraska, which had been playing really well, had been scoring, in I think the mid 30s per game, points per game, were just absolutely on fire. They were in a place where it looked like everyone thought that Nebraska was going to win. So the line was originally 4.5 points, I believe, but it got bid up to 9.5 points pretty quickly in favor of Nebraska. Now it came back down. People came back to reality, and it ended up at about 7.5. But either way, if you're a 7.5 point favorite on the road, that means you're at home. You're like a 2 touchdown favorite over that team. So everyone thought the Gophers were going to get run out of here. And Minnesota just showed up looking good. And I want to say welcome to everyone in the chat. Please, let me know you're here. Throw something in the chat. I will respond to it. It's nice, thank you for joining me on this auspicious night as we celebrate and talk about the Gophers' 24-6 win over the Nebraska Cornhuskers. But it was not Emmett Johnson's night. from the beginning. I mean, he ended up with 14 carries for 63 yards. And some of that came late. For most of the game, Emmett Johnson was absolutely bottled up, had nothing he could do. And then you look at Dylan Raiola, who's been a much ballyhooed, was a 5-star recruit out of high school, is in his second year as a starter, has shown some improvement up until this point. And Dylan Raiola finished 17 for 25, which isn't bad, but for only 177 yards, 7.1 yard average, 0 TDs, 0 picks, 39.4 QBR. Woof. A 39.4 QBR is not good. That is not something to, be overly excited about at all. So, yeah, sorry. I just want to get, letting people know that I'm going live. So if anyone wants to, they can come join. Dylan Raiola is a 5-star recruit. He was a 5-star player. A lot of people think that he's going to be a good NFL quarterback. So for Minnesota to shut him down, and the Gophers sacked Raiola 9 times tonight. 9 times. I said, I don't want to pat myself on the back too hard, but I said before this game that I thought it was going to be kind of low scoring, kind of a slug match, and I thought the first 1 to 10 points would win. Well, the Gophers were not just the first team to 10 points. They were the only team to 10 points because Nebraska only managed 6 points on 2 field goals the entire game, and both of those happened in the first half. I mean, honestly, in some ways, this game was not even as close as 24-6. I mean, Minnesota pushed Nebraska around, was far more efficient on offense. I mean, the Cornhuskers ended up with, for the evening, they ended up with just over 200 yards. Just over 200 yards for the night for Nebraska on 36 yards rushing. Woof. That is rough. 36 yards rushing on 29 rushing attempts. It was just over 1 yard per rush for the Nebraska Cornhuskers. The Minnesota defensive line deserves a lot of credit. They played really well. This was a big Anthony Smith game. Max Geitman said it was a classic Big Ten game until I turned it off to watch Miami lose. Yeah, Max. I mean, you're absolutely right. That's absolutely fair. And talk to me about the Miami game. I obviously didn't get to watch that, so we can talk all college football here. This is a college football podcast. So talk to me about what happened in Miami, Louisville. That surprised me a lot. I know the Canes, a lot of people, including me, thought the Canes were maybe the second best team in the country. Turns out that's Indiana. So good for them. About to be number 2, assuming they take care of business against Sparty tomorrow. But I couldn't be happier. Carson Beck threw 4 picks. Wow. 4 interceptions for Carson Beck. Are you kidding me? That is bananas. What a terrible performance from a guy who got paid a lot of money. To go to Coral Gables. That is crazy. That is truly bananas. And Mario Cristobal, man, he is a great recruiter. He is a great program builder. But when it comes to in-game strategy and decision-making, he is just not it all the time. He just really is not. And he makes a lot of mistakes. So, yeah, it's Max, I'll tell you, the Gopher game, it was 7-6 at half, but you could tell Minnesota was playing a little better. And the last play of the first half was a sack, and the whole crowd erupted cheering the Gophers as they came off the field in the first half. And I thought, man, if we can keep that energy, that Minnesota's going to win this game. And the Golden Gophers not only kept that energy, but they increased it, outscoring the Nebraska Cornhuskers 17-0 in the second half. 17-0. Just an absolute clinic. I think you got to give a lot of credit to Minnesota defensive coordinator Danny Collins. Danny Collins, he got his guys to tackle this week. And that's been the big problem. Football, we talk about scheme, we talk about personnel, we talk about a lot of things, but at its core, football is a simple game. You have to block, you have to tackle, and you have to make plays with the ball in space. That's the game. And Minnesota tackled and set edges and blocked tonight in incredible fashion. And I'll tell you what, when Darius Taylor broke off that long run that should have been the first touchdown, I thought he got in even on the replay, but maybe he was out. I don't know. It was hard to tell. But he nearly scored a touchdown. The Gophers, get it on the sneak right after that, which, hey, Minnesota can run a sneak. Hey, we saw a couple sneaks tonight. I've been wondering all year. We have a 6'5", 225-pound quarterback, 230-pound quarterback. Like, can we just lean forward and sneak the ball? And tonight, the Gophers brought back their sneak packages and did that. All right, let's say what's up to Nathan Taylor, Sky Yuma. Do you think we see more passing in the coming weeks, or is the O-line improved enough to support Taylor and Ijiboy? Yeah, because it wasn't just Darius Taylor. Femi Ijiboy played really well too. He played really well. I was impressed with both those guys. I think in the coming weeks, you'll see a combination. PJ Fleck is always going to want to establish the run game if he can. But a lot of that has to come down to getting off to a good start like Minnesota did tonight. Against Rutgers and against against Rutgers and against Purdue, Minnesota got down 2 scores early and kind of had to abandon the run game. So you couldn't see it really gel the way it did tonight. But tonight, the run game really came together, and the Gophers ran the ball extremely well against Nebraska. So I think this will still be a team that gets I think on most weeks we'll get more passing yards than running yards, but I think we see a bigger commitment to the run going forward because of the performance. Darius Taylor's always great. Femi's really good. It was the offensive line that was different. It's not like Darius wasn't playing, couldn't play before, or Femi couldn't play before. It's that the offensive line did better tonight. They showed up. They were aggressive. They were physical. They finished blocks. They made good reads up front. And, it was watching Minnesota show up and push Nebraska, a good Nebraska team, push them around for 4 quarters. Was just glorious. I mean, it was amazing. All right, we've got enemy ancestor. Nebraska should have won by 50. So here's what I have to say about that enemy ancestor. Based on what? Minnesota pushed Nebraska around for 4 quarters. Minnesota had far more yards. There weren't any turnovers in the game. So it's not like you can say the Gophers got lucky. Minnesota is just clearly the better team between the two of them. Full stop. And I get a little tired. I saw some Nebraska fans on Twitter trying to say, like, oh, why can't we ever beat the teams we're supposed to beat? Maybe you weren't supposed to beat Minnesota. Maybe the Gophers are just that much better of a team than you are right now. And that's just the way it is. Because the Gophers were clearly the better team on the offensive line and the defensive line. And Minnesota's receivers played better and got separation more and did better than Nebraska's receivers. I mean, Minnesota was missing its top 2 cornerbacks. Top 2. In Mike Gerald and John Nestor. John Nestor, who's been fantastic this year. And they shut Dylan Raiola and the Nebraska passing game largely shut them down. I mean, they only managed 177 yards on 25 throws. That was really, really impressive. So I'm struggling to find what's the aspect of the game that Nebraska won in, because the offensive line for Minnesota was better. The defensive line was better. The tackling was better for Minnesota. Minnesota did a better job setting edges. And our running backs, Darius Taylor is better than Emmett Johnson. I don't think that's ever been, like, Emmett Johnson's a nice player, but Darius Taylor is clearly a better player than Emmett Johnson is. Like, it's not overly close at all. So, and Minnesota had the better passing attack. Drake played much better today than Dylan Raiola did. So tell me, enemy ancestor, where did Nebraska beat Minnesota? Where did it happen? Like, tell me. I'm seriously curious. Like, I'm not even trying to be a jerk right now. I just genuinely want to know where you think Nebraska was the better team tonight, because it seemed like the Gophers were clearly better. Max Geitman says Indiana and Ohio State are the clear-cut top two teams in the country. Whoever would have thought that'd be a sentence that's truthful. Hey, man, Indiana has who I think is in Kurt Cignetti. And I said this last summer, and when we ranked coaches last summer, I had Kurt Cignetti as my number one coach in the Big Ten, even over Ryan Day, because I knew he was this good based on his track record. And now we're seeing Cignetti take Indiana to heights they've never seen ever in the modern history of the program. So it shows you that in the NIL era, you can change your fortunes really quickly. And I think that, Indiana, Ohio State's going to be a great Big Ten title game, because I don't think either one of those teams is going to lose going forward in the regular season. So I think those teams will both be 12-0. And I think the winner will be the number one seed in the playoff. And the loser will probably still get a bye in the playoff. Will probably still be a top 4 seed, 5 seed at worst. So yeah, it's wild. We live in wild times, Max. And Nathan Taylor says, fun to see Indiana be competitive with their history. Yeah, Indiana in the 15 years leading up to Cignetti won 35% of their games. Not 35% of their conference games, 35% of their total games. So for, Indiana to come out and do what they've done the last 2 years is, it's a Disney movie. It's barely real, but it is real. It's happening. So you got to give them a lot of credit for that. And it's a lot of fun. Let's see. Oh, enemy ancestor came back, said Gophers punked the Huskers big time. Okay, well, you admit that then. Great. So we can agree that Minnesota was clearly the better team tonight. I think that's fair. It was 24-6, and frankly, it shouldn't have even been that close. Minnesota, should have probably scored at least once or twice more in the first half. It's a joke. Okay. I don't know if enemy ancestor is saying it's the joke to say the Gophers punked the Huskers, or the joke was that Nebraska should have won by 50. So I guess I'm unclear on that. It is late. It's been a long day, but I am excited. So if you want to clarify that. Zay8V says Gophers row well, and says the Huskers do something that's not rowing, but that rhymes. So, yeah, Zay8V. The Gophers really played well tonight, and Nebraska, were kind of stymied from the start. I thought it was going to be a close game. I thought this was going to be a back and forth game that came down to the last possession, and it actually ended up being the least stressed I've been in the fourth quarter of a Gopher game all year, because Minnesota played so well. And, we got to talk. Oh, and let's see. Max says Minnesota beating Nebraska does help push the narrative that the Big Ten is in a down year as a whole, other than the top 3. You can say that, but Minnesota could still end up having a good year and winning 8 or 9 games. That's still on the table for the Gophers. So if Minnesota does that, then I think it kind of makes up for, long term. I see what you're saying. Like right now, Nebraska was supposed to be one of the better teams in the Big Ten, and they didn't just get beat tonight. They got humbled. They got humbled bad. And it was embarrassing for them. Zay8V says, I expected a nail biter too, but instead Minnesota was dominant. Yeah. I mean, the Gophers, at halftime, it was just 7-6. And I thought to myself, oh man, I wish we were up by more. But then I realized, hey, Minnesota played that well as up 7-6. If they keep it up, this second half is going to be bananas. And it was absolutely crazy. We got to talk about, what Minnesota did a little bit defensively. I mean, 9 sacks, including 2.5 for Anthony Smith, defensive end Anthony Smith, and 2.5 for Carter Menz. Carter Menz with a career night thus far, the kid from West Fargo. So great to see him break through and have a couple. So there were 5 right there. Then another defensive end, Jackson Howard, who, went to LSU and transferred back to Minnesota after a year there, had 2 sacks as well. Devin Eastern, a defensive tackle, had a sack. Matt Kingsbury had one as well. And that's how you get to 9 and 10 tackles for loss. I was surprised that, Zay8V says, talk about it, Ollie. D-line was on fire. I mean, the D-line was unbelievable tonight. They shut down the run game. They made it impossible. They made Nebraska one-dimensional. Nebraska was not going to get any yards running the football tonight. And the defense, that defensive line and those linebackers and the secondary too, they made it so Nebraska had to pass. And then Nebraska tried to do what they always do, which is run a bajillion wide receiver screens and bubbles, and they make your defensive backs tackle in space. And that is the best thing the Minnesota defense did tonight, other than the sacks and the pressure on Raiola, was that Minnesota tackled in space. I cannot tell you going into tonight how many tackles Minnesota has missed this year. Against Purdue, it was terrible. Against Rutgers, it was terrible. Against Ohio State, it was, part of that's just because Ohio State's the best team in college football. But it wasn't good. So for Minnesota to turn around and play this well, it says something. And I think it says that new defensive coordinator, Danny Collins, is really coming into his own. Because, it seemed at times in the past few weeks, the Minnesota defense was at times confused about their assignments, and they weren't always sure where they needed to be. And because of that, at times they were playing a little slow. And, you saw it with the way Purdue ran the ball last week. There was none of that tonight. Minnesota came out on point, clicking on all cylinders. The defensive line was reestablishing the line of scrimmage in the Husker backfield on a regular basis, pushing those Huskers back in. Okay, enemy ancestor, 50 points equals the joke. All right, yes. Understood. Appreciate that. Thank you for clarifying. There is no sarcasm font, so I'm not always totally sure, what people mean without having some context. So thank you for providing that context to me. This is a great win for Minnesota. This was a circle the wagons game. The Gophers needed this, a big ranked win to get their season back on track. Now they're 5-2, feeling good about themselves. And for Nebraska, this is a big missed opportunity. This is a huge, huge missed opportunity for the Cornhuskers. They had a chance to make a playoff run, and they have a really favorable schedule this year. If you look at their remaining games, it's Northwestern, and then they have USC, which is a tough game. but UCLA, Penn State, Iowa. So Iowa's tough. USC's tough. Those other teams have not been playing very well. Nathan Taylor says, do you think we see some AP votes this week? And is it too early for thoughts on Iowa? Nathan, I don't think we see a lot of AP votes this week. And I think it's because the Cal loss is sticking in people's minds. So I just, because Minnesota played so poorly in that game. I mean, the Gophers could not have played worse against Cal than they played. Even superstar Coy Parrish played the worst game of his career. So I think that stops us from getting top 25 votes. But and you said, is it too early for thoughts on Iowa? If Minnesota goes into Kinnick and wins for the second consecutive time in Kinnick, that's a good Iowa team. And if they do that, then at 6-2, yes, I think Minnesota absolutely gets into the top 25 at that point. I truly believe that, because there won't be that many teams that are 6-2 that are trying to get into the top 25 at that point. Max says, thoughts for Gophers down the stretch, 2 big rivalries, Oregon, 2 very winnable games in Sparty and Northwestern. I mean, you said it, Max. And in one of those big rivalry games against Wisconsin, Minnesota should be a significant favorite because the Badgers are having the worst year they've had, that I can remember. I mean, it's Wisconsin is really bad. So now anything can happen in a rivalry game. So caveat there. But yeah, Minnesota should have every chance to beat Michigan State, Northwestern, and Wisconsin. So the question is, they probably aren't going to go to Autzen and beat the Ducks. Even though the Ducks showed some vulnerability against Indiana last week, I don't think Minnesota's probably going to go walk into Eugene and get a win. But you know what? If the Gophers play the way they played tonight, I think they can play with anybody in the Big Ten who's not Ohio State or Indiana. I think they can play with anybody in the Big Ten who's not playing at that level and give them a real run for their money. The Iowa game is so interesting because Gronowski is not. We'll see how tomorrow, but last week against Wisconsin, Gronowski's not back to full mobility. He's clearly favoring that knee a lot. And because of that limits how dynamic Iowa's offense is, because they're much better when he's a number in the run game. And with him kind of babying his knee and favoring it, you don't have to worry about him as a runner as much. So I think that plays in Minnesota's favor. And I think Minnesota has I think it'll be a really good game. I think it'll come down to the very end, but I think Minnesota has every chance to go into Iowa City and get a win next week, especially if they play anything like they played this week. Enemy Ancestor, listening to the Husker post game was full of elitist. Minnesota is so below us. I don't understand the thing where Nebraska fans always want to say they're better than the teams that beat them. They went through this with Wisconsin too. Wisconsin beat them 11 times in a row. Iowa beat them a bunch of times in a row. Minnesota has beaten Nebraska 6 times in a row and 8 out of 10. So at a certain point, you're just not as good a program. And also Minnesota and Iowa and Wisconsin up until Luke Fickell were all winning more games than Nebraska. So if you beat a team head to head and you win more games than they do in the Big Ten, you're the better team. Period. And Nebraska fans can be like, oh, but we have all these guys who are supposed to be good. Okay. Well, everybody has 85 scholarships and all the Big Ten teams have money. And other than Purdue and Maryland, all the Big Ten teams have a bunch of NIL. So everybody can compete. Everybody can make it hard. Nathan says, yeah, that Cal loss is a dagger. It really is, man. The Cal loss really hurts. And if it weren't for that, Minnesota would be 6-1 here and ranked in the top 20 if it weren't for the Cal loss. So that one sticks in my craw a little bit. But as I said, Minnesota may or may not get votes this week. I don't know if we will, but if Minnesota goes to Iowa City and beats the Hawkeyes as an underdog, which I think they'll probably be like a 2.5 point underdog, something like that. Then I think Minnesota will be ranked at that point. Zay8V says, I don't get it either. How many times do we have to knock them off before they respect us? I mean, apparently the limit does not exist. To quote Mean Girls, the limit does not exist because Minnesota can beat Nebraska every year. Every year we can beat them. And it doesn't matter. They still think they're superior. It's a delusional fan base. Like, I love a lot of Nebraska fans, and a lot of them are really great people. But as a fan base as a whole, they have a big self-delusion about where they sit in the college football world. They think they are in a much more vaunted place than they are. Max says, I remember when Tommy Armstrong got injured and taken to the hospital, but then returned to the stadium later and Ohio State won by 59. They were saying they would have won if they had Armstrong all game. Well, there you go. If you beat a team by 60 points and they still think they would have had a shot if they had one more player, that's just not rational. Those aren't rational thoughts. Yeah. So, like I said, a lot of Nebraska fans are great, and I love them. But as a fan base as a whole, and it also, I don't totally blame them, though, because their media tells them this stuff, too. I mean, I was looking pregame, and, like, they had serious sports writers who were picking Nebraska to win, like, 42-13 tonight. Like, as if Minnesota's dominance over Nebraska didn't exist, as if that wasn't something that had happened, that's happened over and over and over again in recent years. APB, welcome to the chat. Says, seeing this team tonight makes Iowa a very winnable game. Absolutely. Absolutely, APB. Iowa, if Minnesota plays the way they did tonight against Iowa, they are going to have every chance to win that game. And it's going to be, Iowa, you got to not turn the ball over too much. And you got to hit some big explosive pass plays. And if Minnesota can do that, or in the running game, they got to hit some explosives. If Minnesota can limit turnovers and hit some explosives, they can beat Iowa. Absolutely. Now, Iowa, it's going to be a tough game. It's not going to be easy. It's never easy to go into Kinnick and win. But Minnesota also gets an extra day of rest and an extra day of preparation. So that's a huge advantage for the Gophers going into Iowa as well, because Iowa still has to play tomorrow. I just can't describe the feeling in the stadium tonight. I mean, this crowd was lit from the beginning, and the more Nebraska fans tried to cheer, the more the Gopher fans cheered louder and louder and louder. And I mean, it was a raucous environment. It was a lot of fun at the bank tonight. Like, if you were not there, you should have been there. It was a lot of fun. I mean, I guess unless you were a Nebraska fan, then you probably are glad you didn't go. But if you're a Minnesota fan, it was something else at the bank tonight. And you should come when we have our next home game against Michigan State in 2 weeks. Should absolutely come up and come to that game, because that, especially if we beat Iowa, that game is going to be set to pop. That game, if Minnesota beats Iowa, then that game against Michigan State becomes the biggest game since 2019. Since the 2019 season, when Minnesota finished 10th in the AP poll and went 11-2. So I really believe if the Gophers can get to 6-2 and carry all that momentum and then into that Sparty game, it's gonna be a madhouse at the bank for sure. For sure. I mean, what a performance. And let's talk about Kingsbury at linebacker. I mean, that's a guy, he's coming up and he just makes more plays and more plays and more plays. And it's really fun. It's really fun to watch him. He only had 2 tackles tonight, but one of them was a tackle for loss where he just exploded through the blocker. I mean, he went through a blocker like he wasn't even there. I mean, that guy's going to be great. Max says mid-game, Tim Brando said that Matt Rule diffused all the rumors about the Penn State job. Like, no, he didn't. Laugh out loud. Max, you're right. Matt Rule, everyone's like posted that thing, that interview Matt Rule gave where he allegedly shut down the Penn State rumors. He did not shut them down. That's not what happened. Matt Rule left the door wide open to the Penn State thing. And I don't think that had anything to do with what happened tonight, because I think Matt Rule, I think he knows his team and, you know, they trust him and all that kind of stuff. Because Matt Rule, you know, by all accounts, seems like a good guy. His players like to play for him and all that, you know, all that stuff. And he seems like he treats players well. But no, he did not diffuse the rumors. You know, Matt Rule, most people thought Matt Rule was the most likely hire at Penn State. Now, does that change now that Nebraska's lost a second game and they still have to play USC? So they're probably going to, you know, lose at least one more game. I don't know. I'm not sure what record Matt Rule has to have to be considered, if there's a benchmark he needs to be considered for the Penn State job. But I don't think this story's going away just because Nebraska lost tonight. And Matt Rule and his staff need to figure out a way to address that with the team so that they feel good about where he's at. Because that's important. You don't want that to become a distraction. Like, I don't think it did. I don't think that's what happened tonight. I think the Huskers kind of ran into a buzzsaw in a Minnesota team that hadn't played their best ball and came out, put it together. You know, PJ Fleck teams, that's the thing. Everyone was like, oh, Minnesota sucks. Oh, Minnesota's bad, blah, 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 this and that. These people have not watched PJ Fleck teams. PJ Fleck teams always get better. They always get better. It's not always as fast as you want it to be, but they always get better as the year progresses. And this Minnesota team, you know, absolutely played its best ball it's played all year tonight. It was, yeah. I mean, it was fun. I mean, you look at it, Minnesota it was about 340 yards to just over 200 for Nebraska. Nebraska was just 3 of 11 on third down and 0 for 1 on fourth down. And that fourth down that they got stuffed on was to, you know, to close any chance the Huskers had at a comeback. You know, Minnesota, the passing was about even, but Minnesota was much more efficient. Drake Lindsay was 16, you know, had 153 yards. He was 16 for 20. So Drake completed 80% of his passes tonight. Wow. That's fantastic. Just 153 yards, but 7.7 yards per attempt. And then the Gophers, this is the big story of the night. Minnesota outrushed Nebraska 186 yards to 36. 186 yards to 36. Nebraska, it took them 29 attempts to get 36 yards. Woof. That is not good. It's not good. That's not gonna get the job done most of the time. I just keep coming back to the fact that Nebraska fans were so sure this time, and media, not just the fans, the media, were so sure this time was going to be different and they were going to whip us and we didn't even belong on the same field with them, and blah, 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 all that nonsense. So, hey, if you're here in the chat, you know, please keep commenting. I appreciate it and enjoy, you know, going back and forth about anything college football related. Doesn't have to be Minnesota, Nebraska. If you have any other college football thoughts, we can discuss that too, because I'm feeling awesome. I obviously lost my voice from screaming tonight at the game, but I'm okay with that because I am going to the Iowa game this next week to see Minnesota, but I've got, you know, 6 days until then. I can drink some lemon water and and rest up the vocal cords. Max says Cal, North Carolina got a great game going. 21-18 Cal in the fourth. Ooh. Is Bill Belichick going to get the algorithm? Max, who's got the ball right now? I'm curious. That's funny. That would obviously I want to see Cal win, but it is funny that North Carolina actually has a chance to win a game with as bad as they've looked, as much as they've looked bad. Okay, UNC Max says UNC has the ball on the Cal 44. Oh, so okay, that's exciting. Well, Max, keep me posted on that game. We'll announce who wins and if they, if UNC does score here and either tie it or take the lead. 21-18. That's a weird score. 18 points. 18 points is a weird amount of points to end up with. I'm curious how that happened. If they went for 2 after a touchdown to get it within 3, maybe. Yeah. Miami going down tonight, though. Wow. It just shows you that in the new college football, there are no super teams, and except for maybe this year's Ohio State. And anybody can get you. And, Miami thought they were going to roll over Louisville, and that just didn't happen. Louisville was ready. Just like the Gophers were ready tonight, and they were ready in all phases, offense, defense, and special teams. Minnesota really showed up. You got to give PJ Fleck a lot of credit. You got to give defensive coordinator Danny Collins credit. And, I'd say offensive coordinator Greg Harbaugh as well. Minnesota didn't put up crazy numbers, but they did control the game, especially that second half. And they did play really well offensively in the second half, which was great to see. Great to see, that happen. And for Minnesota to pull that off the way they did. I'm just so happy about this game. I mean, for the Gophers to play the way they did. And, really without John Nestor and Mike Gerald, it was heroic. Guys like Zaquan Bryan and Jayonte McMillan, who don't normally start, were started tonight, and they played great. And, Minnesota's safeties, Coy Parrish, Kerry Brown, Aiden Gooseby made some nice plays tonight. He was back. They've missed him when he was gone, so he really showed out tonight as well. I mean, it was just a team effort. And watching the Gophers play that way was just so gratifying because, I knew they had it in them. But you'd see pieces of it here and there, but you didn't get a full game. Tonight, we got a full game from these Minnesota Golden Gophers. We got a full game. And it was fantastic. I mean, just glorious. Like, I don't even know what to say. I'm so pumped about it. So, yeah, Minnesota wins 24-6. Max Geitman said, well, okay, so he didn't leave for LSU. He signed with LSU out of high school, played there for 1 year, and then transferred to Minnesota. So it wasn't that he transferred from Minnesota. It's that he signed with LSU, played his redshirt year there, and then transferred to Minnesota. And he's been a really big contributor for us, and he's played better and better. And so, yeah, and Jackson, he actually, before the season started, he guaranteed a win in the Axe game, which I appreciated. And tonight he had 2 sacks. So you got to give him a lot of love for that, for breaking through and having a really nice game tonight. I mean, Minnesota had 3 defensive ends who all had 2 or more sacks. 3. That's amazing. And a defensive tackle had a sack. So most of the sacks, there was a sack or 2 for linebackers, but most of the sacks were just the defensive line making plays. And that's what, this is a veteran, senior-laden Minnesota defensive line, and you saw that show out tonight. You saw them absolutely show out with that tonight. Oh, man. So, what's everyone excited for this weekend? We have a lot of great college football games. I'm obviously most excited doing a Big Ten podcast. I'm most excited for the Big Ten games, but there are a lot of good games in general tomorrow. I mean, I'm absolutely pumped to watch ball tomorrow. It's going to be awesome. We've got Washington, Michigan's a really good game. The winner of that is in the playoff hunt. I would say the loser of that is probably out of the playoff hunt. I think that's fair to say. Purdue, Northwestern is really interesting to me. Purdue is playing kind of better and better, but Northwestern is too. So it could be, two teams that are kind of improved a lot since the beginning of the year playing. So that could be really interesting. All right. Max says North Carolina driving 1st and 10 from the 15, about 5 minutes left. Ooh, well, that's exciting. I'm pumped about that. I love getting a good late night game. When you have a normal game and then you get a late night game too, that's always great. Ohio State, Wisconsin, not going to be much of a game. The only question to me is, does Ohio State run the score up against their old coach, Luke Fickell, their old D coordinator? Indiana, Michigan State, not a great game. Oregon, Rutgers, but Penn State at Iowa. Now that's an interesting game. I am so curious to see how Penn State plays in that game now that James Franklin's fired and Drew Aller's hurt. So now we get to see a new quarterback and maybe a new approach from Penn State. UNC had a TV, but fumbled it away at the 1. Ooh, rough. Oh, man. That's if Belichick loses like that. Wow, that's rough. That's rough. Had a TD, but fumbled it away at the 1. That's why PJ likes to say the ball is the program. Got to cover that with 2 hands. And, 4 points of pressure on that ball. That's no good. No good at all. I'll be curious to hear how that one ends up. But and then, the biggest game, Maryland UCLA. Maryland was really good in a 4-0 start, but then like Maryland, October came and they've struggled a little bit. Can they bounce back? And then UCLA was the worst team in the country till they fired Deshaun Foster, and now they're the hottest team in the country coming off 2 consecutive dominating, impressive wins. And then we've got USC at Notre Dame. Now that's going to be a great game. I am really excited to watch USC go play the Irish. I think USC has a great chance. I'm bullish on, I know Notre Dame's a 10-point favorite. I know USC's banged up, but I think I think that game's going to come down to the final possession, and whoever has the ball last is going to win, is what I think is going to happen in that one. So we'll see. The Minnesota Golden Gophers. Oh, what about Ohio State and Wisconsin? Laugh out loud. Yeah, Max. I think Ohio State can name their score. So the question is, does Ryan Day like Luke Fickell or does he hate him? Because if he hates him, he could put up 70 points. It could be like the Bowling Green Massacre. If ever anyone remembers that one, 77-0 Ohio State. And then Kellyanne Conway publicly referred to the Bowling Green Massacre, thinking it was like a shooting, and it was a football game. So that was hysterical. We're not talking politics, just saying that was really funny. So, because, yeah. So, really, really pumped. I just think this Gopher team is just scratching the surface. And, Jalen Smith. We got to talk about Jalen Smith. He was fantastic at receiver tonight. He's just a freshman, and he gets better and better every game. He had the drops a little bit to start the year, and, but now he's getting separation more frequently. He ended up with just 3 catches for 59 yards, but they were big catches. Lemecki Brockington had 2 for 32 and a touchdown. Everybody, Drake really spread the ball around, but everybody who got targeted really contributed. And that's what you want. They made it hard for Nebraska to know what they were trying to do. But I think Jalen Smith, I think the sky's the limit for him. I think that he will eventually be an all Big Ten level receiver. Not this year, but he's having a really nice freshman year. And I think sometime in the next couple years, he will have 1,000-yard season. I really believe that about Jalen Smith. I think he has that kind of capability, which is really exciting because he can keep growing with Drake Lindsay. And that'll be a really fun duo, hopefully for the next 3 years, 3+ years. I mean, who knows? So Gopher fans, I mean, you earned this. The crowd was phenomenal tonight. I mean, just engaged. The student section brought it from start to finish and just made life miserable. And it was hard for Nebraska to communicate, and that was really gratifying to see. Really gratifying to see. Minnesota ends up winning time of possessions, first downs, yardage, all that, all the big game markers, explosive plays. And then we got to talk about Darius Taylor. Darius Taylor has been injured much of the year, and the offensive line hasn't played well in front of him until tonight. And then tonight, he goes for 24 carries, 148 yards, 6.2 yards per carry, and a touchdown with a long of 71 that should have been another touchdown. I still think he was in bounds there. I have to watch it on TV to see for sure, but from the replay in the stadium, it looked like he was in bounds. Darius Taylor is quite simply, one of the best running backs in the country. He truly is. He's a special guy, special player. And watching him, back at full strength, doing his thing, makes Minnesota so much more dynamic of a football team. And it's just really exciting to see Darius, back where he should be. So that's a lot of fun. All right, Max, you going to update us on UNC? I'm curious. So anyone who's watching right now, any thoughts you had about the Gopher or the Minnesota-Nebraska game or any other games this weekend, please let me know. And I am happy to, discuss whatever. I am just feeling so good after this Minnesota win that I'm just enjoying life. So thank you so much for those of you who are joining me with this right now. This is a euphoric feeling. It's an awesome time. And Minnesota fans needed this. They needed it. Gopher fans have been down on this team too, and I think having the Gophers play the way they did today was really important for the program. And that was exciting, really exciting to see. Max says Cal's just running it, 2nd down and 12, 2:16 left after a UNC timeout. Ooh, coming down to the wire. Sounds like UNC might get another shot at it. One more. So that's exciting. But yeah, the Minnesota Golden Gophers defeat the Nebraska Cornhuskers 24-6 in a game that frankly just wasn't even that close. Was not that close. Minnesota was dominant. Even in the first half when the score was close, you could feel that Minnesota was playing better. And in the second half, the Gophers just erupted. I mean, absolutely erupted in all phases. And it was just a lot of fun to watch. So I'm really excited about that. Pumped. And yeah, I think we are all right. Max says 2-minute warning, 3rd and 1 for Cal. Big play coming up for UNC. Right on. All right, folks. I think I'm going to call it. I have to get up. It's 1:04 a.m. I have to get up in 4 hours, a little over 4 hours. That's okay. If you want, you can catch me tomorrow on the Saturday AM Scramble. I will be posting that on Twitter So I'll post it here, and I'll post that live stream tomorrow when it comes out at 8:30 p.m. Central Time. That's God's time on this podcast, as everyone knows. And so I will be live at 8:30 previewing all the top 25 games. And then Norwegian Gopher and I will do a longer recap of all the Big Ten games, as we always do on Sunday. So we'll get that out Sunday night probably. Maybe we'll even go live for that. I don't know. This was fun. It was fun going live. We haven't done that much on this show, but we're going to do that more going forward. And, Sky you ma, row the boat, go Gophers. Gopher fans, you enjoy this one. You earned it. You earned it out there watching this game. And I hope everyone has an amazing night. And I will see you all in the next pod on Sunday.